Does that mean? Okay. This is a door stay from a Subaru Impreza 2001 model, GG I believe it is, and it's off the rear door. Now, an issue with these door stays, well, could also be the age of the vehicle, that they lose their ability to hold the blasted thing open so that you can load the car up without having a third hand. In my particular vehicle, which this is off, I have the issue on all of the 4 horizontally opening doors, and that is, you bloody will need a third hand to hold the shit open to load it up with the other 2. Okay, now, obviously, this has been removed from the vehicle with something I prepared earlier. This also is a rectified door stay. Now, let us turn our focus from that to this. This is an unmodified door stay, and what we have done is we've freed off these 4 little tabs, which you can see there, to release it. Also, the nuts, the retaining nuts which would capture this plate, have been removed. Hence, you can pull the plate back thus. And then you can now see the internal gubbins, which is this shit, whatever you want to call it. This module slides relative to this element, and we have a couple of sliding nylon shoes which are under some sort of pseudo compression by these little blocks, which we can only assume is some form of rubber, synthetic or otherwise. Now, what has happened is, one, there's wear on the contact areas of the shoes, and also some degree of compression has occurred over the last 18 years on these spacer blocks. So what we have as a, dare I use the word, hack, for crying out loud, which is really a modification to rectify the issue, is we're going to insert spacers between the box section of the housing, where my fingernail is there, and the rubber packer. Okay, the material that we have available is some PLA, polylinoleic acid, which is from a construction that is not going to be used. In this particular case, it looks like it's about maybe 1.2 millimeter, okay, and it just happened to be there, so we are going to use it. I've chopped it up with these, the wondrous right-handed vice tin snips, and here's an example of the raw material. So this little packer, this secondary packer, has been chopped up, and he's ready to go in. What I will do now is chop a second one. So I'll get a rough dimension, and that's all it needs to be. This is not rocket science, this is pocket science. Whether you can see that or not, that's your bloody lookout. Choppy choppy. There it is. Okay, now we've got 2 packers, and the fun will begin. That pertaining to, specifically, again, it would help if you had 3 hands. And in this particular case, it's usually a 2-man job, and fortuitously, there's 2 of us. So the intention is to get that bugger and force him in there between the housing and that packer. Stage 1, we're going to get a little twisty like this to assist with holding this plate, this floating plate, out of the bloody way, and facilitate that by moving the crap up and then twisting it. Thus. So, well, no, that's not very good. Second attempt, it's always better. You've learned something, hopefully. Right. Stage 2, get yourself a little bit of juice, in this case WD-40, and then we'll inject a tiny little bit in there and in there. This is going to help with, obviously, lubricating the squeezing in of an additional piece of material that the manufacturer never intended. Now, I'm using this little driver as a wedge to create a space for the edge of the spacer, and believe me, it is tight, but then we all like it when it's tight, except when it comes to, I don't know, something other that perhaps is for not for this video. So I've got the bugger in there. Right, then we'll reach across to one of our tools, plier, squeeze him in, get your little driver again. I can use this to hold the crap. In the absence of a vice, one has to improvise, unless it's Edelweiss. Takes a little bit of compressive effort, and there you are. Okay, that's the easy one. Now the fun truly begins. So we've got the W. We've here's the other blooming spacer, which hopefully isn't too long. See, the issue with this bugger is the volume of the housing is radius on the inside. It's got quite a reasonable radius, so this thing has to be narrow enough to fit in, otherwise you're pushing, you know what, uphill. Driver, create gap, take corner of additional packer. Straight away I'm having trouble, because now we've got a whole hell of a lot in a very, very small space, which is always nice. Yeah. Okay, now what we have here is the beginning, the introduction of the corner of the secondary spacer, because obviously we got the first one in, and as a consequence all of the space has been taken up. So the second one to go in is considerably more difficult. We've sprayed a little bit more lubricant in there, we've got the little driver to create a wedge to create a pocket, and we've introduced the secondary spacer into the housing. And now the fun begins, and we're going to use a pair of pliers
to hold that corner. Yeah, okay. You got to hold. Yeah.
I'm going to flip this over and use my multi-grips to apply some compression. And the jaws are too bloody far apart, so you shift the fulcrum point. Squeeze it.
He's not having much luck there.
Okay, that didn't work.
Alright, stop.
Okay, we're now filming. We're now filming. We have one corner of the secondary packer retained by the pliers on the left, and we're now applying compressive force with the jaws of the multi-grips when we get it lined up. But it looks like the fulcrum has to be adjusted yet again. But it's always nice to have some degree of adjustability because in this world of entropy and the inability to stop erring, adjustability is a good thing.
We nearly got it. The trouble is it's an awkward shape too. But it is going in. When we get it in there. Which it is going in now. As you can see, now we have to and there it is, it's in. I don't know if you can see that, but it's in. Just make sure it goes down. Alright, I'll pass you back to Shannon to reassemble this thing. But as you can see, it's in. Both sides. That's all you need to do. And it has compressed. Okay, Shannon, I'm back to you and pass me the camera.
So that is additional spacers forced in, and has been suggested to me it doesn't have to be PLA, obviously. It can be anything that's not really going to compress too much. You could even use small washers of approximately, I don't know, 0.7 to 1.2 millimeters in thickness, or a bit of steel plate, aluminium, or maybe even some aluminium if you can get hold of that. Now the issue here is we want to try and get the two mating surfaces of the sliding shoe elements, the two white bits, as close as possible, and we've come a fair way towards achieving that end. Now I've released this little floating plate from its capture at the top, and then that will just close off the two. What remains now is to get the original mounting nuts, spin them on so that we can clamp the floating plate to the door stay housing. Take this little spanner, lock them up. Okay, now the four factory retaining tabs will have to get bent back in position. So we'll take the multi-grips once again, adjust the fulcrum again, clamp these two, pin them back into position. That's the first pair, that's the second pair. Pliers, bit of compressive force, close the tabs off, what I'm going to do is return, square these little buggers up like that, and a little bit more squeezy. Right, that is that. So what we have now, I can't demonstrate the amount of stiction and resistance that we have because it's not like I'm piss weak, but you require now a fair degree of force to get this door stay to slide along that element, and we can demonstrate that in part 2 when it's installed in the door. 2001 Subaru Impreza with the Fubard door stays, of which we've also prepared this one earlier too. This was actually the first one that we did, and look at the angle that we're on. We're probably on about 5 degrees of incline, and the door will not stay open before, and I don't know when the last time it actually did. But in this case, now that we've modified, rectified the door stay, obviously the bugger stays open just like it should. That's full extension, and then this is the partial detent, and the bugger works. And I can demonstrate the issue. Here we are. I'm holding it against gravity and it slams. What we've done is we've taken our rectified door stay and now we're going to insert it into the door so that the bloody thing can hold itself open. What is this plastic shit called? It's got a purpose. It's some sort of condensation fucking trap.
Yes, to stop the door trim getting damaged.
So okay, so there's a pocket here on the inside skin, and which is fortuitous for us. So what we need to do is take a little 10mm socket, thus, free those nuts, get the buggers off. Okay, now I need to orient this thing, and I believe it goes that way. Okay, so it inserts into this pocket through the cavity of the door to poke out of the aperture on the door jamb itself in this direction.
No, I don't think they really need this. But anyway, up to you.
Well, look, man, it can be practice if nothing else. What the fuck is that hole? Yeah, there's a bit of bloody kerfuffle going on inside, but with a little bit of adept finger work. Now, like all things, they came apart really easily, and I think that's the harness for the bloody speaker that's jiggering me up, but there she is. She's in place. Got the 2 nuts, banging onto the studs. Spinny. Little ratchet. Okay, step 2, get your little extension bar. Da-da. There you have it. And as you can see, the door now stays. That's fully open, obviously, and that's... Oh, the rear doors, as it turns out, only have 1 detent. So it's fully open or fully closed. Job done. Subaru door stays. So if you weren't entertained by the video, well, tough titties. And you might perceive this as being a waste of time, but in reality I have been quoted here in Shitsville at $190 for a new one of these babies, of which I needed 4. So the car itself is an old jalopy and what have you, but definitely justified having this thing rectified, and certainly on a budget. So this repair cost nothing and could potentially have been $190 per door for the part alone. That's excluding getting some clown like me to do the work, and we've also excluded the removal and reinstallation of the door card. So there you are. Thanks very much, Subaru.